welcome to the woods, the Huckleberry Forest.
I'm excited to be here.
It's good to have you. Really great to be with you, Becca.
Likewise.
Yeah. Thanks for helping make this happen.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm Bill Moyer. This is my man cave called the Vargo on Vashon Island in the middle of the forest. And this is the first time we've done an interview, live interview, definitely in this space, but really we haven't really done that before. And so we're really grateful for the support that you and Jason are bringing. And we're gonna we have this incredible opportunity to get to hang out together with Jess. Let's see, this is already fun. Conard. See, I'm sorry, Jess. I already like a space under my under pressure.
Really, it's the F-bomb right there that you snuck in. That's probably
Yeah. So Jess Conard, who flew out from East Palestine, Ohio, and to hang out with us on Vashon, and you all know each other already.
We do.
And Becca Economopoulos, did I do that right?
You did.
Yeah, see? That is a longtime friend and ally in an amazing inspiration in the work of movement building. And I think we should all just get to start by introducing. I want to hear more about you guys.
Sure. I'm Becca Economopoulos. I live on Vashon, but have not been here as long as Bill. We moved here in late 2018, and we were in Brooklyn, New York for 20 years before that. But a lifelong organizer and collaborator with artists and scholars and cultural producers. We run a nonprofit program called the Natural History Museum, which is a traveling and online museum for the movement that is dedicated to social, environmental, and climate justice.
Jess, you've had a storied last few years. Could you tell us more about yourself?
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for welcoming me onto the island and into your studio. I'm Jess Conard from East Palestine, Ohio. I am here because a train derailed in my community, and as a result, ended up being one of the largest chemical disasters in American history. And prior to that, I was a medical speech language pathologist for 15 years. I'm a mom, and really never was as engaged in activism as I am now. But I realized that, the average person can do big things. And it's been a whirlwind, but done a lot of things in the past 3 years that I didn't think that I could do. And now I'm here on Vashon Island, just a lady from Ohio, small town, girl, grew up in East Palestine, and life is really exciting. And I think this movement as a whole has, really embraced me and supported the work that needs to be done to not just, climate, yes, also, the little pockets along the way, things like rail safety and hazardous material transportation. It's been a wild 3 years, but I'm excited to be here talking with you guys about it today.
I also want to say that Jess is seriously underselling herself. She she smokes Erin Brockovich out of the water. I'll praise to Erin, but Jess is just next level, and the transformation that we've witnessed in Jess since we met, and the stories that she's told about her pre-life and then her post-derailment disaster life are just absolutely incredible. What kind of strength you've marshaled for the benefit of your community, and then your sense of purpose and doing that for every community.
Thank you. None of that would have been possible without the support of this movement, though. I mean, when you create such a chosen family, and the reason that we choose each other is because we're all impacted by this in some way, whether that be, a climate disruption, or, something just in your community socially that doesn't make sense. When you have those impacts, sometimes it feels really lonely, like you're the only one that is like, what's happening and why is nobody shouting this from the rooftops? And so when you find your people and you have that support, Becca and Jason were one of the first people that I met in the movement. I did meet Erin and actually worked with her,
Cool.
which is kind of interesting too. And some of the bigger names in like the anti-plastics movement and petrochemical space where people are doing amazing work. They all came to East Palestine, and I think that is just it was so supportive, and I felt a lot of love. Not just from folks in the area, but people came from all over, especially folks from the Gulf South, who, really have bared the brunt of this for decades longer than, Appalachia. So I've, in the past 3 years, met more people than I had my entire life. And, the outreach it's in this country, but it's also out of this country. I met people from France and Malaysia and Canada within the first few weeks after the derailment. And it's been that solidarity that has really allowed me to feel empowered to continue to do this work.
Bill, how did you come to rail safety?
A very convoluted path to rail, really. I grew up, we moved around a lot when I was a kid, and it wasn't very grounded in any particular community until like a couple of moments. But it was the theme when I was growing up on Indian reservations. I'm not an indigenous to this place, and but my dad and my mom were connected to tribes and working with tribes in the late 60s and through the 70s. And so living on Swinomish Reservation and being around indigenous communities was a really key formative part of my the formation of my worldview and my, I think, sense of consciousness around both injustice, racism, and then I grew up as a social justice Catholic. My mom was a very strong influence in what I think Christianity is supposed to mean, and so the difference between the world that we think the way it ought to be versus the way we actually are confronted by what it actually is. That contrast, I think, was always a force for me, and it's just interesting to get to have that experience of feeling like you can actually do something about it. And so I really I resonate with your that, and I find joy actually in hearing you talk about that discovery of that aspect of yourself. I was talking to my mom recently and trying to present more of a balanced perspective on knowing the things you can change and changing the things you can change, and the things you can't change, knowing the difference. And she said to me, "Oh, but that's never been an issue for you." I'm like, "Mom, I'm trying to strike some balance here." But so I had a really great mom and a great dad as well.
I love that.
I'd forgotten that, and I have in some ways a similar path, like raised Catholic. And the contradiction between the values that are taught and then the reality of the world, and then also moving to the Pacific Northwest specifically because we were working with folks at Lummi Nation who were fighting North America's second largest proposed coal export terminal at Cherry Point, Wichiakin. and now just learning right before this podcast that was a huge moment for you diving into rail work.
The resistance to try to stop the expansion of the fossil fuel industry's use of the Pacific Northwest, the place that I have grown up, my entire life. I'm a fourth generation Washingtonian, I would say. I like to say. Gives a strong connection to place, even though four generations is nothing compared to our indigenous allies, right? Mm-hmm. And the indigenous leadership has been there throughout all of these fights. Mm-hmm. And so supporting indigenous leadership has been part of the journey. And I think because of growing up around indigenous people, it made sense to me. I felt like to whom much is given, much is expected. I grew up hearing. And so when the Cherry Point export terminal came about and the Lummi were leading the fight against that, Backbone Campaign, the activist organization that I co-founded with some friends, really pivoted to trying to help do what we could, like with giant banners and light projection and that sort of spectacle action, to join in that fight. Mm-hmm. And it was meeting a rail labor guy named Mike Elliott and having a conversation with him about Mike, why are you sitting at this table with Peabody Coal and BNSF fighting for just a few jobs? And he's like, I don't trust these people as far as I could kick them. It was up to me. We nationalized the railroads, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Mike, a few months later, gave me a 2008 paper about modernizing the Northern Transcon. I didn't know squat about railroads, including what exactly is the Northern Transcon.
I hear that.
Right?
I know way more about railroads than I ever wanted to know.
and yet it's a super steep learning curve, and right, and it's constant. And I'm like 13 years into it, and it's still super steep and constant, but it's super fun because here's this opportunity. Mike said, "Why don't you see if you and your people can green this paper? Like, how do we make this a better system?" Because I think in Mike's heart of hearts, he knows from intimate experience as a rail worker that the railroads are an amazing transportation infrastructure.
Yes.
They have all this potential, and that something's happened to skew that potential and distract from the public purpose for that the railroads exist to serve. And now they've been captured by corporate and financialized, Wall Street purpose that is diametrically opposed, really, to community safety, to the interests of many sectors that we get to explore on our Reconnect America podcast and through the solutionary rail work. Mm-hmm. So that it was the same fight that got me introduced to rail. And like most progressives, I was like, oh, what we need is bullet trains. And now I'm like, bullet trains. F-bombs, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
All right. It's a podcast.
Bomb trains.
Bomb trains, bullet trains, anyway, so I think it's really cool to be able to come into something that and get introduced to infrastructure, the thing that sits underneath everything else and supports our society. And there are many doorways in, and some have a climate doorway, some have a community protection. I guess for me, it was protecting the Puget Sound. And so, but for other people, it's different stuff. It's like good jobs, or it's access to an infrastructure to support local industry,
right?
Stuff that we lost.
Yeah. Well, and we were talking about sort of how we got our beginnings, and I've always said I'm just a speech therapist. I never knew what I was doing. But there was a time back in 5th grade that I feel like I had my first real organizing experience, and it was, the goal was saving souls, right? So my friend invited me to youth group, and it was great. We would go and play games, and there was snacks, and then we'd have 10 minutes of lesson, which was the most boring part. But then there was a lot of friendship that came with that. And so I went back to my parents and I said, we should go to church. And so they went to church, and then I went to my neighbors and I said, hey, you guys should come to church. And then they came to church. And 4 more houses down the road, everyone started coming to church. And then their families, they would come over and I'd say, you should come to church. So I probably recruited about 20, 25 people to the congregation. And I think about that as like, that was sort of my first outreach and organizing and getting volunteers, which is what that is. And, you know, throughout the years, I've done like fundraising for, you know, youth groups and other community and civically engaged projects. But then, you know, COVID happened. And I went right to work and got fabric and elastic and shoestrings and anything that we could use to make masks, and didn't actually make any masks myself because I don't know how to sew, but I was the organizer. And we ended up shipping 7,200 masks all across the nation. We had orders coming in from nursing homes and other, you know, group settings and things like that. And so it's interesting, you really can dive into this from a perspective that is personal to you, and you can make it something that ends up potentially being a social movement, or maybe it's just something like bringing the people on your street to, you know, something that they're interested in to make life a little better.
Seems like the pursuit of happiness to me.
Well, it's funny. I was actually thinking about making meaning out of suffering, which is I have a friend who's over at Union Theological Seminary in New York, this amazing Black queer organizer there, and who's a part of the house ballroom scene, which is church for queer, poor, Black folks who've been excommunicated from their families and from their, you know, and so like the joy and the activism that came from making meaning out of suffering. And that's what he names as theology. Theology is that. And theology can be religion, but it can also be music. It can also be dance. It can be any number of things. But seeing how you parlayed those skills into this major rupture in not just your life, but the life of so many others in your community. And you've like really made meaning out of suffering. Like, and maybe we can start there is like, what's happening? What's the good stuff that's happening, that's coming from this tragedy, that's coming from your work in diving into the steep learning curve of the rail industry?
Well, I like to think that we can all agree that we cannot let a crisis go to waste. And that is something that that's more of a reactive strategy, right? But the goal, especially with Rail Watch, is to catalyze the crisis in East Palestine to prevent train derailments across the country. I think that we can do that. I think that anything's possible, but I think that it's probable that we will do that. And I think that is the motivating factor in why we do this work, is because the change is not only possible, but it is probable when we stand up and we fight for what we want.
Yeah, and the one of the things that I learned from hanging out with community organizers is that you think about what is the vision you have, you know, for what's the change you want, what is the power you need to manifest that change, and then you have to assess what's the power you actually have in the moment, and then figure out your strategy is like, how do you build from the power you have to the power you need? And social movement is relational. So building those relationships, whether that is through the church community or the alternative communities, it seems like it's a core part of being an agent of change, and it can manifest in lots of different ways, different skill sets and such, but building relationship and sowing cohesion amongst sometimes disparate allies and sometimes unlikely allies, I think has great promise. And that's one of the things I really love about railroads, is that railroads literally and figuratively connect all sectors of our society. And the failure of railroads to serve their public purpose is impacting many different sectors of society in various different ways. So the more that we can find common cause in turning that around, the better. I do think that for people who don't know the specifics of what happened in East Palestine, Palestine.
Thank you.
Sorry, East Palestine. I'm going to get this right. I'm going to get Conard right. I'm going to get East Palestine. I'm going to get. I actually was going to bring an apple and then throw it at somebody just so I can remember that it's Appalachia, not Appalachia. So anyway, steep learning curve. But anyway, do you think it would be okay to talk a little bit about, just hear from Jess about?
I think so. Yeah.
About what are the basics, like what happened in your community?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's definitely a question that I have had a lot of.
I bet.
And I think before I start into that, each person in my community has experienced the train derailment differently. There was a big divide, east side versus west side, because, the train derailment happened on the east side. I live on the far west side of town, so I think when you hear the story, I just, there are so many other folks that have experienced this differently. But it was just a regular Friday night. I was hanging out upstairs. I was reading. My partner was downstairs. The kids were in their rooms playing. I think my youngest was sleeping, and I started hearing these sirens, which isn't totally unusual, but it's a really rural space. When there's a siren, usually there's something major. And, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of sirens up and down the road. And I thought, what is going on? And I went downstairs and my partner had the news on, and I said, what's up? And he said, there's been a train derailment and there's a really big fire. And so we just sort of sat there and texting some people, in town to try to check, where is it? Is everyone okay? And really didn't know much that night. Didn't really know about the vinyl chloride. Didn't really put anything together. My sister actually, we found out, was downtown at the local pizza shop and heard the derailment when it happened. But we found out that the train was actually on fire when it went through our backyard. It derailed 2 miles away, and the train had actually been on fire for almost an hour prior to it coming through the community. And there were 911 calls that were coming in. I think the first 911 call came in from Sebring, Ohio, which is actually 4 towns away. There is video footage of the train being on fire in Salem, Ohio as well. So there was ample time to stop the train. The systems in place, like hot box detectors, after Friday night, we saw the wreckage. It was still burning, and it, burned for several days because of all the chemicals. And we started to hear about the leaking vinyl chloride car. And it was this one car. Everyone was concerned about it exploding. The National Guard was deployed. They had a 1-mile evacuation. And again, I'm 2 miles out. So we just kind of hunkered down like we were supposed to. And it was the weekend, so we didn't have anywhere to go really anyways. So Monday rolled around and my partner went to work. He drove, out this other side of town, and they actually had stated that they were going to schedule what they called a vent and burn. And what ended up...
Sorry, but who makes that decision?
Yeah, good question. So there was a group of people called Incident Command, and it included the regional administrator from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the governor, some members of our municipal, the fire department, and I think the railroad was a part of that. And also maybe somebody from the vinyl chloride company. So I know the vinyl chloride company was a part of those discussions because if you read the National Transportation Safety Board docket, which is like a 500-page docket of the investigation, Oxyvinyls is the company, and they repeatedly said that a vent and burn was not necessary, which is concerning. They repeatedly said that the temperatures of the vinyl chloride was decreasing and that there was no need to drain it. And generally in circumstances like that, you would bring in a specialized truck and you would suck the chemical out and then you would dispose of it or take it off site. And then you would, clean up the wreckage. But unfortunately, in this circumstance, they really wanted to move a freight train through, and that was going to take weeks to do. So
You mean another freight train that was behind it or something?
Yes, it was in the next yes, they were all backed up. Yeah, on both sides of the tracks. There's 2 lanes. So so I was at home with the kids by myself, and the vent and burn was scheduled for 3:30, and they said that, and I was watching the news. It was a 1-mile radius. They said, anybody outside of the 1-mile radius, please be aware this is happening. You must evacuate. And it was a circle. Well, and I kept watching it, and it sort of turned into a square. They sort of shifted that. And then they said it's a 1 by 2 mile radius, and they had this rectangle that was this way. And then it shifted to this way. And then it was like this oblong. And I thought, I'm getting the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Like, I'm leaving. I'm packing my kids. And like, this is the part of the story that I always cry at because it was just like, I panicked. And I like told the kids, I was like, get your shoes on, get your coat, because it's February. I said, get in the car right now. I said, whatever you want to take with you, throw in this bag. And I just remember saying to them, like, it's going to be okay. But I'm like, we might not have a house when we come back, And I literally just threw like all these things into a bag. I don't even know what I put in there. I just wanted to get out of there. And so the kids were like, okay, like they had like not a care in the world, which I'm grateful that they didn't have that like panic like I did, which also makes me feel like maybe outwardly I was keeping it together, but inside, and started to drive out of town. I called my brother to meet us in the town over. And so the cousins ended up having this like pizza party in the middle of the day. And we were texting some folks. We had, everybody knows everybody in a small town, and ended up hearing that the vent and burn was a success. But they blew holes in not just 1, but 5 rail cars of vinyl chloride, full rail cars of vinyl chloride. It was 116,000 gallons that was drained into a soil ditch near waterways, Leslie Run, Sulphur Run. And then they just lit it on fire. We returned to town probably about 5:30ish, and you're driving into town and like the whole sky is black over your town. And you could see it was like this big like pipe, this big tornado structure that was like, tornadoes come from the sky, but like this one was coming from the ground, and it just, this big black plume of smoke. The whole sky was just, and there was a weather inversion that day, that week. And so what ended up happening, and the smell was just terrible. In your eyes, your ears, your mouth, everything just felt toxic. And it's like that smell that like sends warning signals to your brain. You're like, danger, danger. And but the weather inversion kept the chemicals smell and the chemicals in town, the particulate matter. And
that plume was visible from outer space, I recall.
The plume was visible from outer space, and the studies later showed that the particulate matter traveled 16 states, including parts of Canada. which is like a third of the US population as well. But yeah, the whole week I was lay down sick, and yeah, the smell was just so terrible. They told us though, it's not toxic, you're good. The air quality's fine.
Yeah.
And they had all these data points. They were like trying to prove that the air quality is fine. So a few weeks after the derailment, the CDC held sort of a town hall where they had said, it's likely that you've been exposed to these chemicals. There's really not much that we could do about it, but we can treat your cancers. And, that's when things really started to kick into high gear for me. I went home and I wrote, a book of questions that I had, and started really engaging with the CDC and the EPA, and started calling my officials and really just hitting the ground running with that.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So going back to the moment of decision, so the burning the fire had already been put out, right? The original fire that was, I guess, a half a mile long or something.
It had been burning for the weekend, but most of it was out. It was controlled.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then they did the ditch, and they had the one car that was leaking, and then somehow they decided they were going to puncture the five other cars carrying vinyl chloride. But who the hell made that decision?
Yeah.
Why?
And the decision to burn. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was
vaporizes basically, right? That gas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's like, yeah. So Incident Command was the name of the team that were making the decisions. And so this is, the governor, the EPA, municipal leaders, and the fire department, Norfolk Southern. There were probably others I'm leaving out, but those are sort of the main heads. But how I understand those decisions, the final decision was made by our fire chief in East Palestine. And from what I understand with that decision is that he was only given 13 minutes to make that decision. And, having all of those people in the room and pinning that decision on somebody, he was just trying to do the best that he thought. And I don't think anyone in our community blames him. I mean, maybe some people do, but I think the majority just feel like that's an impossible decision. And especially when you're getting fed information that is inaccurate, by those that were interested in just moving the freight train along versus protecting our environment and our health and our economy. I mean, this has devastated our economy. We've had several businesses leave. We're having trouble getting people to work in town, to live in town. Our school system admissions dropped. I mean, there have been so many things that have been impacted by that decision. But yeah, it was our fire chief. But you do the best you
like
can.
A fire chief has that kind of the experience, or why would that? It doesn't even. Yeah. It's not even fair.
Yeah.
For the fire chief to have to make that call.
Right.
When they're not an expert in this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but the pressure sounds like, if from the NTSB report, it sounds like the pressure wasn't coming from the chemical industry. It wasn't coming from the shipper. So one assumes that it was coming from from Norfolk Southern.
Norfolk Southern, yes. And, they were definitely the ones that, according to the docket that the National Transportation Safety Board has, it's public information. It's like a 500-page docket. Oxyvinyls repeatedly stated that a vent and burn was not necessary, that the temperature of the vinyl chloride was decreasing, and, that was not what was presented as evidence enough to not do it. So Norfolk Southern, I think was a leading factor in the ear of not just the decision maker, but of our governor. And if you look into, the financial records of, campaign finances and things like that with our governor and Norfolk Southern, there's a relationship there. And it's unfortunate that those relationships ended up, being priority over the health and safety of the community.
Jess, what did you learn as you kind of dove whole hog into response, which took you all the way to the White House, meeting with President Biden and, on Good Morning America and CNN and so on, and public hearings. So a lot of advocacy over the last couple of years. But what surprised you about rail safety, about what happened in your community and what could happen anywhere?
A lot surprised me about rail safety. I think at its core, the way that the rail is regulated in the United States, there's a lot of hands in the pot. The Federal Railroad Administration is all appointed or hired officials. And so there are no elected leaders that are helping to make decisions that would impact the railways. We have to advocate and have champions to do things like that. So you have the Department of Transportation, the Department of Homeland Security, you have OSHA. These are all agencies that help to regulate and enforce the laws. There is a huge federal preemption over rail, and all the rail is privately owned. So I think that too, if you think about what if our highways were owned by private companies or billionaires, and how that impact our infrastructure and our daily lives? What if they never filled the potholes, or what if they didn't plow, or, what if there were roads for, people of certain income, or, however it is. I think there's a huge problem with the way that rail is, should I say, under-regulated. And also, it really does tie the hands of the states and the communities where this is most impactful. But those agencies that, I think my biggest takeaway is, the agencies that are put in place for safety to protect us, that's not really what they're doing. They're not protecting community interests. They're protecting corporate interests, and that was that's still very troublesome.
Yeah, very troublesome. The fact that the decision was forced onto this local player who didn't have the expertise to make that call, and the other public officials like the governor were feeling pressure from this multi-billion-dollar corporation that had other traffic that wanted to move, and I bet your local fire chief couldn't even imagine the sort of nightmarish funnel cloud plume that you experienced. I bet there's no way a fire chief would do that to their community, knowingly. So it's just
and who was doing the atmospheric modeling? I mean,
right. And why 13 minutes to make a decision?
Just the very fact that shape of the evacuation zone kept changing,
shifting, right?
In real time.
Yeah.
Speaks to, you cannot predict, and harm can't be contained within some artificial circle. The thing it makes me think about, having worked with folks in Houston along the ship channel, where, rail safety is a huge concern because they're dealing with oil and gas and petrochemicals careening through their neighborhoods, and the blast zone, exceeds multiple schools, right? Where children live and play. And it kind of brings me back to thinking about here in the Northwest, the Cherry Point fight, or Wichiakin for Lummi, an ancestral village where they would have built this, that one of the strategies the Lummi and working with Sierra Club and other groups did was going up and down the coal train routes, right? To hold ceremony, to have events and speakers, and build solidarity in these communities that are saying, not in my backyard, but knitted together have collective power. And so in that way, I see it a bit as if we're permitted to reframe, a crisis-opportunity insofar as the rail lines connect our communities through the threat of great harm. And they connect our communities in solidarity, in forging family, and in building the capacity to make change.
Right. You know, and thinking about, you could take your kids and you could go someplace. And I think about our friends in Houston, Fence Line Watch, you know, Yvette Ariano, full disclosure, one of the leaders of that, or founders of that organization, is a co-chair of the Backbone Campaign, my organization. And they have said to me multiple times that they have to be sheltering in place because they're in this place that is just surrounded by the petrochemical industry, and that they have to, you know, seal up their doors and windows, but there's no place to go for those communities. So,
yeah, well, and this is that you make a good point. They're held hostage, right? I mean, even if you're thinking about like the East End, which is sort of this like triangle of, you know, rail where the crossings are blocked for hours and hours and hours on end as, you know, the petrochemical industries there load their rail cars. And this is causing huge problems, right? If an incident were to happen there, but also like a disruption in life. There was a death because a child was trying to get to school and, you know, ended up going across the rail because, you know, kids, their importance is the tardy bell, you know, and they're thinking about like, I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's unfortunate that we don't have $1 billion industry able to build the infrastructure so that we can get to our doctor's appointments and get to school and get to work on time. Even something as simple as developing detour signs.
Or how about running trains that fit into the sidings so you don't have to block intersections? It's like they should but because they want to make more and more profit, they want to lower their operating ratio, they want to have larger and longer trains, they create these hazards with the mix of the substances that are traveling, but even just the length of the train.
Yeah.
But it's all about cost reduction and profit maximization. So it's not the incentives over and over again. What we're learning through our work in rail is that incentives are so screwed up.
Right.
And they're all since 1970, 76, 1980, especially, they've all been like pivoted away from the public purpose of this critical national infrastructure. Because none of us are talking about getting rid of trains, right? But making it actually serve its public purpose, not merely a private purpose. Or private purpose has been skewed even further by shareholder activism.
I feel like people, you know, the narrative has continued to be like, if you disrupt the railroad, if you disrupt, you know, this profiteering model, then the economy is going to collapse.
Right.
Like you can't do that. You can't prevent the railroad from running their business however they want to. But look at what the railroad is doing to the economy in East Palestine, Ohio. Look at what it's doing to the economy at the East End. Like people can't get to where they need to be, and they can't spend money, which is, you know, how our economy continues to move. It's the railroad that is disrupting the economy.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem. It is their responsibility. If they're going to say that they are the ones that are pushing the economy forward, then they have to take that responsibility. If I fuck up, that's my problem.
Amen.
Right? That's not anyone else's problem. And I'm tired of them pointing fingers and putting the blame on the ship, like what they're shipping and the people and the politicians. Like we are trying to bring the railroad into a space that makes it good for everyone.
You know, you're making me think about how it's the deindustrialization in Appalachia due to corporate-driven globalization and privatization, right? that has affected your region and many over. And we see this happening in other parts of the world as well. So the major, massive derailment a few years ago in Greece, where hundreds of people were killed. Well, there was an economic crisis and crash in Greece, and the response was structural adjustment programs, right? Selling off these public assets and infrastructure to the highest bidder. So the privatization, and then what you lose is regulation, and it's prioritizing profit over people and our future, collective future. And this isn't just happening in Houston and these towns that are hubs for petrochemicals, right? It like this stuff has to get transported from wherever it's extracted, and it goes through. There is no town across America that's safe.
Well, and they're not just prioritizing profit over people; they're prioritizing profit over economy of these communities.
Right.
So if their pitch is, we help the economy, then that's also a false narrative.
Yeah, there's a lot of bullshit going on. So each crisis that have risen to the public's attention over the last decade and a half. Originally it was the unit trains moving Bakken crude and on Powder River Basin coal were undermining the farmers in the Dakotas' capacity to get adequate service to get their grain to market. And that created in 2015 the STB, Surface Transportation Board Authorization Act, which started to shift a bit back towards the public purpose. It gave us a little bit of a lever. But that's since 1980, when the Staggers Act encouraged railroads to consolidate, to spin off their branch lines to less regulated short line industry, to abandon tens of thousands of miles of track, and to do a series of sort of cost-cutting measures to create revenue adequacy that then became, as we're learning, has become twisted by this simultaneous other aspect of financialization, part of a neoliberal model. And I'll just say a friend of Stan Sorcher, someone I look to for understanding neoliberalism, as like says that the four legs to that stool are deregulation, privatization, globalization, and austerity. So suck the benefits from the community, anything
Right.
Public programs, and because our railroads have always, from our entire history, except for a few tiny moments, been owned by private corporations. Like, we chose to have private entities run this critical national infrastructure, and it's never really worked. And they keep using consolidation and profit maximization to try to make it work. And we're kind of in this end game moment with the potential merger and such. But there was another really important incident, a regulatory moment that we learned about recently. That was in 1982, the Securities and Exchange Commission changed a rule that used to forbid stock buybacks. So because it was market manipulation, it artificially reduced the number of shares and increased thus the value of shares, which then reflects as higher earnings per share, which then feeds additional growth in the stock value. The railroads really started using that around 2004, 2006, when they ran out of other sort of cost-cutting measures. But it's that kind of, that's been the sort of the shareholder activism that makes it very hard practically, honestly impossible for even railroad executives to manage their railroads in a way that actually prioritizes community safety or service to their customers or better resiliency for their workforce. Because besides that, like that experience with the wheat farmers, there was experience then in the COVID where there was a supply chain interruption. Who was interrupting the economy then? It was the railroads, because they had furloughed so much of their workforce. They had cut down on their maintenance. They couldn't handle the bump back up in volumes of freight. And then when the workers were pissed off because they're working too much, and they're saying, hey, we don't even get days off, we don't have sick leave, and we're getting punitive results of if we stand up for ourselves, if we go to a family funeral or respond to a kid's sickness. So they wanted to strike. They threatened to strike. But God forbid that happen, because it would interrupt the economy, right? $2 billion a day or some shit like that. But we missed to Congress, and Biden failed to allow them to do that, to use that leverage to respond. And they're responsible for that. And then East Palestine was the next sort of time, along with Lac Megantic, when the derailment happened up in Canada. But when the railroads became their motivations and their skewed incentives became a public concern, and they're not doing favors. Their economic impact is negative to the shippers, it's negative to the communities, it's negative to the workforce, and it's all been sort of reshaped to serve a financialized global supply chain and not serve our economy. Like, I bet that trains used to stop and actually serve the industries that were made your community.
Yes.
But now they just pass through.
Yes.
With their hazards.
Yes.
Well, and not to derail the derailment conversation, but I mean, that is happening in so many other sectors.
Totally.
Like Amazon workers, who don't get P breaks, and are like, where corporations are in the poly crisis, what they're calling this time of multiple overlapping and intensifying crises, are kind of like applying this prepper mentality to, all right, well, now's the time to disaster capitalism, right? Like, to bolster our wealth. It's this like opportunism and this sort of prepping for an increasingly unstable future where they're prioritizing their own stability at the expense of the rest of us, which, going back to the rail conversation, is that railroad drawing lines of solidarity. Who are the odd bedfellows, right? The unusual coalition partners that you all are, or potential partners, where you're finding common cause and people are recognizing a common oppressor, if you will.
Dare we say?
Dare we say? Well, I mean, I also want to make sure that I love your phrase of or connecting Cancer Alley in the Gulf to Cancer Valley in Ohio. And so there's that the more obvious connections, like we discovered with Solutionary Rail, that the obvious connection, we had the workers that sort of inspired us to even do our project. And then we had our environmental justice allies who are every day and for decades and decades experiencing the health impacts of living around these rail yards, ports, and warehouses, and all the sources of pollution that are shortening their lives. So there's like the ongoing disaster that those people experience. There's the failure. There's the tragic working conditions of the railroad workers. So those were the obvious ones at first. And so, but then like we're discovering it's like the shippers. I never thought. I got into this fighting coal. Increased coal shipments and exports through this place that I love. Well, coal shippers who run, somebody who runs a a power plant, if they can't get the coal service they need, they risk not being able to provide power to their community. They're in jeopardy. They're opposed to this business model and the incentive structure that we're currently experiencing.
And I think, you mentioned solidarity and those that have been in this space and worked, in this aspect of social movement and climate justice. And, I do want to mention the really incredible work that has been done by communities, specifically in Pennsylvania. Southwest Pennsylvania Breathe Project has done a lot of work in rail. They've had a railroad coalition for many years. RP3 is another smaller grassroots group that has been really navigating the railroad infrastructure and trying to call that out. And, I think at some point we do have to recognize that there is a foundation of work here that we can stand on. And as we continue to build that, you can build the house, and we will continue to press these initiatives forward. And the more people that are impacted by these industries, specifically by derailments, people are starting to notice. In the United States, we have on average 3 derailments every single day. Every single day. And, some of those are hazardous materials. A lot of them are hazardous materials. A lot of them are at crossings. And, these are people places. And, even if there aren't people, you have our natural resources. Recently there was a derailment in Surrey. I mean, think about some of in Connecticut, there was a hazardous derailment. I mean, they're all over the place. And when you start looking at, it's kind of like 6, 7. It's like you don't really notice it until you do, until you think about it. You get a Jeep and now everyone has a Jeep. But I think ultimately it's like that, but it's
had that.
Subaru. On that shot, it was Subaru. Yeah,
I think I'm the only one with a yellow Jeep. But anyways, you once you sort of start to identify that derailments are regular and predictable and should be expected. Because if we don't start making changes in this country for rail safety, that's only going to keep getting worse. And so I think really identifying those who have already been in this space, I think is going to help, which is sort of why I'm here in Washington State. There's a community right now in British Columbia, north of Vancouver, that is getting ready to have a hearing here the end of the month on a rezoning. And the reason that this is important is because communities can identify that there are issues and they can make decisions to prevent derailments. This rezoning specifically has to do with putting chlorine in liquid form on rail cars. Chlorine, when it leaks, becomes a gas. It's heavier than air, and it can kill you within a few seconds, a few minutes. And so, depending on how much of it you're inhaling, this is very dangerous to put chlorine on rail. We do it all the time in the United States. It's unfortunate. We have chlorine rail cars that sit next to schools all day. But the point is that this community has an opportunity to make a decision to reduce that impact. And I think that when you're provided with these opportunities, especially at the municipal level, to, engage in something that could prevent a derailment, even if it's preventing something from going on the train or preventing less of it from going on the train, whatever that decision is, make it now, because you don't want what happened in my community to happen in yours. And it's not fear-mongering, it's predictable. This is going to continue to happen again if we don't start making these changes now.
I want to ask a question of both of you, and maybe this is the bring it together question. You, Jess, just started a new organization, Rail Watch, so maybe you can tell us about that. And you wrote a book, Solutionary Rail. And so I want to ask you both about your vision. How could this be different?
Yes. So Rail Watch is sort of the phoenix of the East Palestine train derailment. And it's been something I've been thinking about for a long time, and really glad that the timing worked out the way that it did. So Rail Watch is a nonprofit organization that is just meant to work with communities to prevent train derailments. I want to be really laser focused on that. And the way that this has come about is, communities have continued to reach out to me, wanting to share their concerns and, wanting me to provide them with some sort of stepping stone in the right direction. And so this is something I've been doing already for the last couple of years. And throughout my advocacy journey, I've learned how to navigate through really treacherous waters, whether that be with agencies or how to meet the president, how to get a meeting with the White House, how to make an impactful news release. Those are all things that I never knew how to do before. And so I feel like I have this skill to offer communities that can really make an impact. And so I started Rail Watch because it makes sense. And I think I'm the only person in the country who's doing this right now. And so I'm excited to see where it goes. But in the past 2 weeks, I've worked in 11 different states. I've done 17 community consultations. There's a need for this, and I have more that want to sign up and that I have scheduled. So I think this is definitely something that communities can find a sense of solidarity with. And once we create little pockets of rail watchers all over the country and we, build that grassroots movement, it's grassroots to global. That's the saying, right? And so we have to start in our hometowns and push the needle as far as we can.
Yeah, just building upon that, one of the things that we learned at Backbone Campaign was that you can try to fight the national fight and you can sometimes succeed, but it's only going to succeed. You're only going to really win with a lot of movement power. And it's easier to mobilize people when they're protecting what they love, whether it's me in the Puget Sound or you in your community. And it's fun to watch you light up with this, it's kind of a surprise, isn't it? Like, what do you mean I'm the only one doing this? Why is it so obvious? Why isn't somebody doing something about this? So I can really relate to that. So this idea of protecting what you love, so connecting it to communities. And I've learned so much from being part of the Moving Forward Network, which is a network of community-based organizations, a coalition of community-based organizations that's led by community-based organizations and folks like Solutionary Rail, Backbone. We support, but they're the leaders because they're leading from their day-to-day experience, and they're protecting what they love and their community. And it's a very grounded kind of activism too.
Yeah.
It's not reactivism in a way. It's really grounded in a relationship to each other, a relationship to place. So I think that's a much more resilient type of organizing. And I have a great deal of admiration for that. And I think labor organizing is somewhat similar to that, right? It makes a material difference in people's lives. So, and that idea of building from the power we have to the power we need. And none of us are really talking about getting rid of railroads.
No.
The opposite, right?
The opposite. We need railroads. We just need them to not derail.
Right.
We need them to stay on track. We all want to stay on track.
No, let's stay on track. And they're what's off track. Like the service of Wall Street instead of Main Street, the service of private accumulation of greater and greater wealth by the people who've got way too much already. At the expense of everybody else, that's the fucking bullshit right there.
Yeah.
It's also the history of railroads and industrialization in this country.
There you go.
Yet you all have a direct lineage coming, that you're building from, right?
Yeah.
The very first unions were rail workers.
Right.
The very first strike in the United States at great risk to life and limb. People found courage in banding together and knowing that change may not come in their lifetimes, but that they're setting up, the long haul.
Yeah.
that what you're doing right now will impact generations to come. So thank you for your work, both of you.
Well, thank you. And I do think that this is it's so great that you're doing this work, right? Because you feel
Right back at you.
that no one else is doing, so it really does connect to protecting communities. And I do think that, our Reconnect America project is really a celebration of the potential for railroads to better serve this country in numerous ways. And, part of that vision is that the trillion tons of long haul freight that's currently on our roads that pisses off everybody of every political stripe could be back on the railroads, but not at the expense of communities. So those trucks that are going into these rail yards and those should be electrified. And the rail yards themselves, they're the place to start with electrification. The rail corridors are the railroads are assholes when it comes to co-locating transmission. And we've had this totally screwed up transmission system in the U.S. where, again, we rely upon private entities to go and put together pieces of land, and it never works. We've got twice the amount of electric generation sitting in a queue trying to get access to transmission as we're actually generating. Mm-hmm. And what's the solution hiding in plain sight? It's rail corridors, maybe highway corridors too. So there's a new act around that we're the Rail and Highway Transmission Act that we're part of now, which I'm excited about. But the electrification of the railroads, the greater use of the railroads for passengers and freight. Passengers are another potential ally here. They're really.
Yeah. Well, and I love that, you're bringing up policy, right? Which is so important. And I think the narrative right now is that, there's this big federal preemption blanket and states and communities can't do anything, but that's actually not true at all. And, back in the early 2000s, again, using Pennsylvania as our leader here, they wanted there to be toilets and sanitation stations on the trains, which did not actually exist at the time. And so they were having an issue with some of the rail workers using the bathroom on, off the side of the train. And so this became a sanitation issue. And so Pennsylvania, there is actually a law that states that states can enact their own laws as long as it's not federally preempted and it doesn't cause a huge disruption and it's not super expensive, whatever. That's probably not the language, but you get it.
I get it, yeah.
And so what happened is the court found that this was in the best interest and it wasn't a disruption of service. And so trains couldn't go through Pennsylvania without having these toilets and wash stations on trains. And so what ended up happening was the federal government responded, and now we have toilets and wash stations on trains because Pennsylvania took that leap and the courts found favor in that. Now, there are other states like Wyoming and Arizona. Wyoming recently tried to pass a bill about train length. The courts did not find favor in that, which was unfortunate. They're working on things to develop policies for hotbox detector placement every 10 miles, which is something that the NTSB said in East Palestine, 15 miles apart would not have prevented the derailment in East Palestine. So shortening that up, that's not federally preempted. We can pass laws at the state about train length and hotbox detector placement. Same thing in Arizona. They're trying to also pass a bill on limiting train length. So it is possible, and we need to find those places in the courts that are going to interpret the law. We need to write the policy in an effective way, which I think that was sort of the problem in Wyoming. Is that the policy wasn't quite right. And I think we can do a better job of that. That would be a good job for a future lawyer if you know anybody. But I think, being able to write policy that makes sense, that is moderate. I mean, we're not asking for anything that's going to prevent rail from happening. We just want it to happen the right way. So policy is huge, and there is power in communities. There is power at the states, and we need to start utilizing it.
Yeah. Yeah, and the crisis opportunity. How do you say
Christopportunity.
crisis-opportunity? This other crisis-opportunity that is emerging is the proposed merger of Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern.
Yes.
Right, they're at this end game of trying to create more profit, not by competing with trucks with the systems they already have, or or growing the volumes on the railroads, which hasn't been happening. It's been going down. They've been they're doing it through consolidation, and so it's bringing together a lot of folks that are unlikely allies, from the shippers to labor to environmental justice, etc. And it's an opportunity for us to be saying, you know what, the infrastructure is at what happens underneath. It supports and shapes the economy and how we interact with each other, and how we how we live, how we exist, and it could be doing so much more, and it could be serving this public purpose, not just this very short term wealth accumulation purpose. And so it seems like this is the really golden opportunity to build alliances and develop what are the public purposes that we want. And this probably we're not going to get it all probably with this particular fight, but it's a great time to build coalition and to start to build the vision for what we want. So I'm super excited about what you're doing.
Well, and if you look at really great organizations like Pipeline Safety Trust, they host a conference annually where they bring in activists or impacted folks, government authorities, and industry. And we all sit at a table. I've gone for the last 2 years, and it's an awkward and uncomfortable place.
Right.
But I think that there are certain alliances that would align. And if we don't come to the table and talk about what we want and what we don't want, then nothing is ever going to change.
Amen.
So we do have to be able to invite in, maybe somebody that doesn't necessarily have all of our views. And why is that so radical? Even just going back to, 5th grade Jessica, who had her whole block going to church. I had no idea what their political affiliation was. I didn't know what their background was, but I was like, hey, youth group's cool. You should bring your kids, because these are things that are going to potentially benefit everybody at the time. So I think being able to just approach people in a neutral way, I'm not gonna mean mug you because you work for Shell, but I understand going into the conversation that we might not have an aligned vision, and that's okay. But there is a space that I think we can find where we can sit together.
Well, I think the critical thing to name is that when you're in that room, you're not just Jess Conard, you're the thousands of people when we're building movement power. So you're representing something that does pose a challenge and a threat. That's how those negotiations and finding common cause can advance concrete changes, is because you're larger than yourself.
That's true. Well, and you have all of those impacted that, are no longer with us as well. And that spiritual element is the heart of that conversation. And that's, I think, also how we can create real change, is that spirit, ethical considerations do matter here. And that is what makes us human. And there needs to be an element of humanity in the rail industry, and I feel like that doesn't exist right now.
Well, and this is how Jess and I and Jason met, is our organization was doing a project, We Refuse to Die, kind of based on the idea that industry and authoritarians and oligarchs are writing off our communities as sacrifice zones, as the living dead, right? And that it is in forging a coalition between the ancestors and those we've lost, and those that walk now who are being written off for dead, and those in the future whose futures are being foreclosed, right? This is the army that we're building. right? And it's powerful. We're building on the legacy of those who came before us, and their spirit endures, right? And they're in the room, whatever your faith tradition is or is not. There is the reality of like those freedom fighters, back to the first strikers on the railroads, right, are a part of our forged family. And so we are multitude when you're sitting in the room.
Yeah. Well, and to sort of explain like externalities, right? So I've spent the last 3 years working to prevent the placement of polluting facilities. And one of the things that I think about a lot is that motivates me isn't necessarily about the economy at all, but it's about like, if we place this facility next to this school, next to this housing development, how many of those kids are going to get asthma? How many of those moms are going to lose their babies? How many of those dads are going to develop a heart condition because they're huffing particulate matter? Those are the reasons that we do this work. And it's without the thought of, the 30 jobs that it's going to bring into this community. And when you think about that from a rail perspective, the Federal Railroad Administration has an alleged violation form that you can fill out. And I think about like, how do they decide which communities to go into first if it takes 3 to 6 to 9 months to respond to one of these complaints? If the risk is higher in this space, but this is a wealthy white community versus a BIPOC community, like I'm tired of those decisions, and humans not taking priority in how we make those decisions. So it's the externality, that piece of it, that continues to drive the work. And I just wonder, like, how many train derailments have they predicted for 2026, for 2027? That there's an ability to calculate which communities are most at risk for train derailments, which communities are most at risk for chemical spills. You have these locations where they're transferring, like at the Houston Ship Channel, where they're transferring chemicals from a truck to a train. That's a huge risk zone, right? Mm-hmm. So we can identify the high-risk communities, and that's a project I would love to be able to work on with Rail Watch once we get moving. But being able to identify those high-risk communities so that we can really start to do some work there for preventing train derailments.
I think you have a lot of common ground with the folks like the Moving Forward Network who have a sense of how is that poisoning happening in their communities already, and how would like there's some places where if the merger were to go forward, there would be a 400% increase in volumes, which would thus bring all sorts of more pollution to those communities. So there's a lot of crossover. It really feels like mapping this stuff is very important. So there's like this technical aspect of what we're doing, and then there's a spiritual aspect of what we're doing, the sense of meaning, the protecting the places that we love. And I feel like your work with creating, ritual for solidifying, creating cohesion amongst allies, and a sense of attaching people's action and increasing their resolve. These are grand strategy principles. Increase cohesion, deepen resolve. When you hold a ritual amongst people who are committing to protect their community, when you're providing them a very concrete, like policy way to protect their community, that grows our power. And I bring it back to the Lummi and the Coast Salish people and their leadership in the Salish Sea here. I was at a rally at Victoria, Vancouver Island, the Preserve Our Coast rally, and the young people, Indigenous speakers who would get up to the mic repeatedly said, their elders are telling them, more or less, I'm paraphrasing, right, is that this is not just a political struggle, it's a spiritual struggle, and it must be fought from a place of love. And to me, love and connection, our relationship, our movement power is relational power. So we go into these spaces where we're not necessarily comfortable, but we humanize each other. we create the opportunity for communication and love and solidarity. And we identify, having been able to tell the story, that lifts us up, that we're representing not just our self and our little ego journey, but previous generations and future generations. It's like the 7th generation principle of do no harm, right? That really, I feel, is like that's the glue that is going to help us win.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not, we hear that in Gulf South communities too, right? Like this is a spiritual battle between light and dark, in Louisiana. Miss Deborah, Miss Lois, and Sharon Levine, and so on. Like,
yeah,
this is what they bring to the work, but there is also a ferocity to it. It's not kumbaya, right?
No.
It's like,
It's not comfortable. Most of it is not comfortable. The comfortable part is that solidarity piece, right? To know that you're not alone,
Yeah.
even though it feels lonely, to know that you're walking into that room with all of the people that came before you, that you are representing them. That's where you can find your peace in the most uncomfortable place. You have to turn inward because the external validation no longer exists in there.
And we're bolstered by our connection to each other and our communities and the work we do together. So, hell yeah.
and there's like a reframe, right? I see it in you, like a transmutation of, we've talked about that with a ritual as like the aim being to metabolize grief into collective strength and community power, right? And so whatever it's like we're Teflon. It's like what Trump said, I can walk down the middle of like Madison Avenue and they can shoot me and it'll bounce right off. Well, that is you, Jess. That is Miss Deborah. That is you. That is like, it's like in banding together and being like, okay, you see us as externalities, right? Industry's term for talking about the cost of doing business that doesn't show up on their economic ledgers, right? They're paid for by the community's health, by your children's future, by the land and the animals, right? Like,
What is the currency?
Yeah.
And who is paying?
Right. And so they're the externalized costs, right? That they're not paying for. In the meantime, they're making record profits and taking care of their own, right?
That's right.
And so it's like, all right, you see us as vermin, as commies, as animals,
Radicals.
as monsters, as externalities, as the living dead. Like, sure, that's who we are, and there's multitude of us.
Yeah.
And we are bringing an end to your, like, the apocalypse we're talking about that they're so afraid of is the end of the extractive, exploitative world, right? And we're the army that's bringing that about, rooted in love, with strength and ferocity, and conviction and principle.
And I don't know if it is apocalypse is or Armageddon. It's the revealing, like
That is the word, yeah.
that is
It's Greek.
yeah, and it's revealing, right? So in a sense, because
Peel the veil back so you see clearly.
right, and when we use the word they, there are some people that are involved, of course, but there's these forces that are involved. I feel like it's also it's a paradigm battle, and it's one of the things in grand strategy is you're supposed to win without sowing the seeds of future conflict. So that means you have to have a vision for the future that people see themselves in. And so I think that part of the unveiling is that we're opening up the opportunity to have a better life, more meaning, more connection to the places, to other people. And so it's a real opportunity. And the multitudes, who in the multitudes would not say yes to that if they could feel that?
Right.
Yeah. I love you guys.
Super fun. Thank you so much for doing this. And Becca, thank you so much for being a neighbor on Vashon who's just blows my mind every time I get to hang out with you. Oh,
Back at ya.
yeah, go team.
Who knew? Just a lady from Ohio would
Seriously.
be here this week doing these cool things, and I'm so excited to hear about your work and align and see what kind of good trouble we can make.
Beautiful.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely be making some good trouble. I know that's in the and it's so. Also, I love the Phoenix aspect of your persona.
The day that we met Jess, she had just gotten this tattoo, and it still had the cover on it.
It's a phoenix.
See, it's just from that neighborhood girl who's like recruiting her neighbors because she wants to feel more connection and everybody have a good time together. To having this like threat, this horrifying threat hovering literally over your head in your community, to then and all of your other good work, but then to just see like I said you're on fire, and you're like, yeah, my community was on fire, but this is perfect. It's a great way to show the joy of the engagement in being of use in this short little life that we get to be connected to the people before and after us.
Right.
Yeah, and it's so beautiful.
Thank you.
I love that you identify with that.
The artist is blind, so that's
What?
kidding me?
Oh, blow my mind.
no, she's
Okay.
blind.
Wow.
She can see little bits, but yeah, she's the blind tattoo artist. She lives right down the road, and yeah,
Oh my
Yeah.
god.
she's incredible. It's like a resiliency story, like over and over and over.
Yeah.
And there's so many like pieces and parts of it that go untold, but trying to get it all out in one podcast
It's not, one part.
is never gonna happen.
It's not going to happen, right?
This is also
but I
a
do
great
think
thing. When you talk about like
Yeah.
the apocalypse, the seer was blind, like the one who could foretell the future,
See,
has no sight.
only you
But
would
they
know
can
that.
see the future.
Yeah, thank you. And the oh shoot, there's something. No, I guess part of it is I think it's part of the joy of this all is to see. Wouldn't it be great if our society, our economy was awakening that genius in everybody, that we were actually solutionaries, that we were solving problems together? Because I think with all the political divide, what I see, in rural communities and everywhere you go is that people are brilliant. People are creative geniuses. They need to be tapped and not deadened, not replaced by AI or some shit. It's like we need to be tapping our intelligence. So I feel like you're a great example of that and an inspiration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right.
Far out. Let's call it
Maybe that's
a
a wrap.
wrap.
That's a wrap.
All right.